This is actually the first episode that I'm recording that the intro is recorded after we got episodes up on Spotify. So if you're listening on Spotify, shout out to you. Welcome to the podcast. Spotify is where I like to listen to most of my podcasts, so that was kind of special to get it up on there. It was a pretty good feeling. I will be uploading every new episode to Spotify as well as the YouTube channel. At least that's the plan for now. So if you want to listen to the show, please subscribe to the YouTube channel or follow the Spotify feed. One thing you might notice if you've listened to the podcast before, that my voice might sound a little slower in this episode. In previous episodes, I sped up my voice about 25% just because that's how I usually like to listen to podcasts. My friends were asking me like, hey, why don't you just let the listener decide and choose to speed up the podcast or not? I guess the reason why I decided to speed it up beforehand, like in the podcast itself, is just because when I listen to podcasts, one thing that's annoying to me when I listen to them fast is that the music sounds really bad. When it's sped up 25%, it's the speed difference is really noticeable on the music. So that's something that has always kind of bugged me, and I kind of always thought like it would be cool to have a podcast where the music is still the normal speed, but then the talking part is sped up. The reason why I like the talking sped up usually is just because it really makes the podcast a lot shorter. Obviously, like it will make the entire length 25% shorter. And also, it's really easy to get used to, and you just get through like a lot more information at a time. I get that that's not everybody, and also I get that it might turn people off at first. Kind of sound weird, especially with the quality of the audio that I have. So moving forward, it might be a good idea to keep it slowed down like this. So that's why I'm trying that now, to kind of see how that is and see if people like it. That's another thing with my audio. I think that I'm going to definitely invest in a better mic soon, but I have a lot of episodes that I want to get to before the season starts back up. So most of these episodes will probably just be on my crappier gaming headset mic. By the time I get a nicer mic, I'll have quite a few podcasts under my belt, probably, or quite a few episodes under my belt. And so then I will be a little bit more polished, and on my first higher quality sound-wise episode, it might go pretty smoothly. And then I'm thinking about, sharing the podcast with the world soon, putting it on my Instagram or Facebook or something. And so it'd be nice to get a higher quality audio and better episode to really be the first one that I share with people. So that's kind of my plan with that. So I am recording this on Friday, July 24th. So we have seen a few scrimmages now in the bubble. The Nuggets actually played the other day. They played against the Wizards, but their starting lineup that they rolled out was Jokic at point guard, Jeremy Grant at shooting guard, Bol at small forward, Paul Millsap at power forward, and Mason Plumlee at 5. So an all big man lineup. And I actually saw a meme that, it was just a picture of that lineup, and then it said the Rockets are shaking right now. Which, obviously the Rockets are playing micro ball. They have no center. They have no big man out on the floor. And the Rockets and Nuggets are very likely to meet in the Western Conference playoffs. So I found that pretty funny. But today there was the Sixers versus Grizzlies game. So I was texting back and forth with a couple of my friends. My friends Anthony and Jacob. Anthony's a Sixers fan, and Jacob is a Celtics fan. So it's always fun to talk about Sixers and Celtics with them. They have a bit of a rivalry with that. We were talking about the Sixers and Grizzlies game. We were talking about the Matisse Thybulle dunk on Jaren Jackson Jr. And obviously we ended up talking about Ben Simmons shooting threes. So yeah, it just feels really good to be talking about basketball again. So I know last episode I did talk about several different things that I said I would be talking about in this episode, but I will not be able to get to all of those today. I kind of said a lot of different things last episode of what this episode would be about. I don't really know what I was thinking. I think that all I'm really going to get to today is the MVP race as well as all NBA teams, and that's really going to be it. But, I have a lot to talk about in that regard. And the reason I decided to talk about the MVP race and all NBA teams in the same episode is just because out of all the season awards, those two have the most similar criteria for, making the case for the players of where they should end up on them. I know that they're not exactly the same all the time, but they're really similar compared to all the other season awards. So one thing that we're going to be doing today is when we're comparing player to player on the MVP ladder and all NBA teams, we're going to be using some advanced stats to level the playing field to make it easier to compare player to player. And so one of the advanced metrics that we're going to be looking at is just stats per 100 possessions. And for those of you who don't know, all stats per 100 possessions means is you take all the player's stats, points, rebounds, assists, all that stuff, and you divide it by how many possessions that player plays in a game, just to get a good number of what their stats are per possession that they play, and then you just multiply that number by 100. And the reason why we use 100 possessions is because it's a nice round number. It's a pretty nominal amount of possessions that are in a game, and it's not too far off from how many possessions players play in a game. It is a bit more. So these stats, when we read through them, might seem a little high, but most games players do not play 100 possessions, but it just is a nice round number that's not too far off of what they might play in a game. So that's why we're going to be using it. And it really just evens the playing field and makes it easier to compare player to player because they're all playing the same amount of possessions. You know, as you'll see with someone like Giannis Antetokounmpo, he's played much fewer possessions this season than anybody else on the MVP ladder. And the reason why that is because he's been playing so well through the first 3 quarters. The whole Bucks team has been playing so well through the first 3 quarters of the game that they're destroying teams, when they're playing, the Knicks or, a lot of these bad Eastern Conference teams. So Giannis, along with some of the other starters on the Bucks, are sitting a lot of fourth quarters, and that's really bringing down his stats per game because he's playing a lot less possessions. That really shouldn't be something that counts against him because the only reason he is sitting a lot of those fourth quarters is because of how phenomenal him and his team are playing through the first 3 quarters. So that's why we're going to be looking at stats per 100 possessions. Another metric that we're going to be looking at is for efficiency, and that is true shooting percentage. And to explain true shooting percentage, I should probably explain effective field goal percentage first. So essentially all effective field goal percentage is just a percentage form of your points per shot, the amount of points you made per shot attempt. And so just for example, if you shoot 2 shots from 2-point range in a game and you make one of them, so you shot 1 of 2 from 2, your normal field goal percentage would be 50% and your effective field goal percentage would also be 50%, but for a different reason. Your effective field goal percentage would be 50% if you shot 1 of 2 from 2 because you made 2 points across 2 shots. Effective field goal percentage treats every shot from the field as a potential 2 points. So effective field goal percentage will take how many points you made and divide that by double your shot attempts from the field because every shot attempt is worth a potential of 2 points. For example, if you shoot 1 of 3 from 3 in a game, your normal field goal percentage would say that you shot 33% because you missed 2 shots. But you did still make a point per shot. You made 3 points across 3 shots. So your effective field goal percentage would still be 50% because the shots that you took were worth more points. Normal field goal percentage doesn't take into account how many points 3-pointers are worth. Effective field goal percentage does. So let's say what you just shot from 3 and what you just shot from 2 happened in the same game. So you shot 2 shots from 2, 3 shots from 3. You made 1 of the 2-pointers and 1 of the 3-pointers. Normal field goal percentage would say that you just shot 40%. You shot 2 of 5. But effective field goal percentage says that you made 5 points in 5 shots. So you have 5 points out of a potential 10. So that would mean that your effective field goal percentage is 50%. Now let's say you take another 3 that game and you make it. So you've shot 1 of 2 from 2 and 2 of 4 from 3. Normal field goal percentage would say that you shot 50%. You shot 50% from the field because you made 3 out of your 6 shots from the field. Effective field goal percentage says that you took 6 shots, but you have 8 points. So you have 8 points out of potential 12, which is 67%. So your effective field goal percentage was 67%. So hopefully that makes sense. So then all true shooting percentage is all of that, but it also accounts for free throws as well. And the reason why it's important to account for free throws is because think of Jordan against the 89 and 90 Pistons. Every time he drove to the rim, they would knock him on the ground intentionally and send him to the line. So let's say in a game against the Pistons, Jordan shot 1 jumper at the beginning of the game and he missed it. And then every play from then on, he drove to the rim. And let's say the Pistons defenders knocked him to the ground intentionally every time he drove in and sent him to the line. So far, he has a normal field goal percentage and an effective field goal percentage of 0%. He took 1 shot from the field, but he hasn't made anything. So both of those are 0%. Let's say he takes 28 free throws that game. And let's say he makes 24 of them. What true shooting percentage does is it counts free throw attempts as half of a shot attempt from the field. So 28 free throws would count as 14 shot attempts since they're only worth 1 point and a normal attempt from the field is worth 2. So if you shot 28 free throws, that means that would equal 14 attempts from the field. And if you add that to the 1 missed shot attempt from earlier, that makes 15 total shot attempts. And so if he made 24 of his 28 free throws, that means he would have 24 points, and he would have made those 24 points in 15 shots in this case because of the 14 free throws and the 1 missed shot from the field. So if he made 24 points in 15 shots, true shooting percentage would say that he made 24 points out of a potential 30. So he shot 80% true shooting. So true shooting percentage is really just a more meaningful efficiency stat compared to effective field goal percentage and especially compared to normal field goal percentage because it does take into account free throws and 3-pointers and how many points you made per shot. So it really paints a fuller picture of really how efficient a player is scoring. Obviously, true shooting percentage isn't perfect, to really show the full picture of how efficient a player is, because it obviously doesn't take into account how much attention the defense is showing that one player or where they're taking the shots from on the floor. If you're a Rudy Gobert and you're rolling to the rim every play and catching lobs, getting really easy shots right next to the basket, you're going to have a super high true shooting percentage because all your points are right next to the basket. So, you're scoring more efficiently, but you have a much easier shot. So we're also going to touch on that a little bit too. Talk about shot difficulty a little bit when it comes up. So jumping into the MVP race, I have 13 guys that I'm going to go through for the MVP race. And really why I chose so many to do is because I think all these guys from like 8 to 13 could all potentially fall in the top 5 or 6 in any normal other season. I think that this season was really jam-packed with a lot of players that were kind of playing around that same level. It was hard to really have a cutoff point, and I thought just all of these guys, what they did this season, should be recognized and kind of mentioned. So I'm going to go through all of them. I'm also going to go through in reverse order, so 13 to 1, just because I think that's more dramatic and more fun to do. So to start off, at number 13, I have Pascal Siakam. Spicy P. So this season he has been really good, leading that Raptors team to a record of 46-18, which is good for the second spot in the East, and it's the third best record in the NBA. The Raptors have definitely overachieved this season, and Pascal Siakam is a big part of that. The jump that he's made from last season to this season has been huge, which is just kind of funny to say because last season he won Most Improved Player. He's definitely going to be a candidate for that again this year, and if he does win that, that'll be the first player in NBA history, I believe, to ever win that award twice. The main thing that he's improved on this season is his ISO scoring, just shot creation. His ability to go get you a bucket has been huge. That's something that he was kind of limited on last season. He was really just more of a catch and shoot threat, especially in the corner, somebody that can drive to the rim and slash and cut and do all those things off ball. But this season he's really developed into more of a primary ball handler in a way and has been able to create off the dribble. So I think the next thing for him to improve moving forward would definitely be his playmaking ability, which, is actually pretty decent right now, especially for somebody at, the forward spot that he plays. But something to really put him into the next level and really transcend him above, into the top 5 of MVP voting from year to year, I think would definitely be ramping up his playmaking ability a bit, really training and working on that, which he's been a really interesting player to watch because throughout his career, kind of like in the way Kawhi has, each offseason kind of added a new dimension to his game, added a new thing to his repertoire. So yeah, that's something that I think Spicy P will continue to do in the coming years. Overall, really good season from Pascal Siakam. His per 100 possessions stats are 31.8 points, 10.1 rebounds, 4.8 assists, 1.3 steals, 1.2 blocks. He had a true shooting percentage of 56%. So yeah, solid efficiency, really good season. Did miss 11 games, which is something that I'm going to talk about with quite a few players, mainly just because of how short this season has been. 11 games really isn't anything in a full 82 game season. It's not too much to worry about, but in a season with only 64, 65 games is really what most teams have ended up playing. 11 games is a pretty significant chunk of that. That's definitely something that should be taken into account. Overall, really good season for Pascal Siakam and the Toronto Raptors. So coming in at 12, I have Jason Tatum. Per 100 possessions, he scored 32.9 points, 9.9 rebounds, 4.1 assists, 2 steals, 1.3 blocks. True shooting percentage of 56%. So, efficiency and everything actually really on par with, the season we saw from Pascal Siakam. Jason Tatum is definitely more of an ISO scorer than Pascal Siakam, somebody that you'd probably trust more in bigger moments, closing games. That's just kind of more the player he is. He also is, I would say, a tad bit better on the defensive end as well. That's mainly the reason why I have him over Pascal Siakam on the MVP ladder. He's also played several more games than him. He's missed just only a handful. Jason Tatum also had that stretch in the last month or so of the season, really since the All-Star break, where he really played like he was one of the top 5 best players in the league. He was really just playing like a bona fide superstar. With Kemba out, he really grew in that role as the primary ball handler and the guy that was closing out games for them, hitting huge shots, just really, taking over the game. It would have been really interesting to see if the season did continue, normally and finished out normal 82 games. If he would have kept rolling like that, if he would have kept playing at that high level, he might have ended up a few spots higher on this list. But since most of the season he really just played as, normal all-star level, and it was really that last month or so, really, ever since the All-Star break, where he really broke out as a superstar in this league. Looking forward into the playoffs, it'll be very interesting to see if he continues playing at that level, and it also will be super interesting to see where his career continues and goes after this. Really solid season from Jason Tatum and the Boston Celtics. Coming in at number 11 on my MVP ladder, I have Bradley Beal. Bradley Beal had a very impressive season, rather historic as well. If you're just looking at his normal counting stats, so his just normal per game stats, 30.5 points per game, 4.2 rebounds, 6.1 assists, and he shot 45.5% from the floor. And so the only people to ever eclipse those numbers, the only people to ever match those 4 stats that I just listed off in a season, it's a very short list. There's only 4 players on it. So we got Dwayne Wade, Steph Curry, LeBron James, and Michael Jordan. So yeah, definitely a very special, impressive list to be part of for Bradley Beal this season. I think he's not going to worry too much about missing the remainder of this season, because they're a long shot for that 8 seed in the East anyways, and he's obviously missing the bubble because of injury. He had surgery on a rotator cuff, I believe it was, but with him ending this season with these stats, he definitely probably won't lose too much sleep over it. Really good historic season. Nice place to leave those numbers. Per 100 possessions, you're looking at 39.6 points, 5.5 rebounds, and 7.9 assists on a true shooting percentage of 58%. Yeah, really good season from Bradley Beal. Obviously, the Wizards haven't been a fantastic team this season. They are kind of in playoff contention for the Eastern Conference. They are a bit of a long shot for that 8 seed, like I said before. They're in the 9 spot right now with their record is 24-40, I believe. The Wizards have been an interesting team this season. They are one of the highest scoring teams in the league per game, but the only problem is they have one of the worst defenses in the league. Like, they allow the most points per game out of almost any team. I believe they're actually first in both of those categories. So it's been really interesting to kind of turn on the Wizards sometimes and see a game going down to the wire with both teams in like the 150s, almost 160 sometimes. They've had quite a few games where they're scoring a lot of points just because they're a pretty efficient offense, but defensively they just don't really have any pieces out there for the most part. And all the pieces they do have out there that are kind of more defensive molded players are really young, rookie type players, and usually defense comes very hard to rookies and people really starting their career in the NBA. That's definitely a skill that really picks up with experience, even more so than other skills. But overall, very impressive season for Bradley Beal. Some people would not put him this high on the MVP ladder. He didn't even get an All-Star selection this season, which I think was the biggest snub that I've ever seen. There are a lot of All-Star voters that really care a lot about teams' records, which, is obviously important. Winning is important to even judge, individual players by. What I don't like is when All-Star voters put out these blanket statements, like I heard this season with, the Toronto Raptors, they're the 2nd seed in the East, so they have to have at least 2 All-Stars on their team. So I have to at least vote for 2 players from the Raptors to put in the All-Star game, which I think is just bad logic because it doesn't take into account the chemistry or, the roster of the team, what kind of team it is. A team can have very good success by having a great coach like they do in Nick Nurse, by having a lot of really good serviceable rotation players like they have with Serge Ibaka and Marc Gasol and OG Anunoby and, all those guys, Kyle Lowry, Fred VanVleet, and not have to have multiple All-Stars. I believe Kyle Lowry did have a All-Star level season this year, but to put him in an All-Star game over the season that Bradley Beal has had, I just don't think is fair and doesn't even make any much sense. So I don't like when All-Star voters do that. I think it kind of just ruins it. It's just kind of stupid to me because, All-Star voters are given that vote because they have the judgment to judge on a case-by-case basis. They need to take these issues and these votes and these ballots on a case-by-case basis. And you're not doing that when you're making rules like this team has a certain record, that means they have to have this number of All-Stars. That's not case-by-case basis. You're just making a rule. You shouldn't just make it like I have to put Kyle Lowry as an All-Star because I need to fill that requirement of having 2 All-Stars on this team because they're the 2nd in the East. I think that is just a really problematic way of doing All-Star voting, and I think it needs to stop. Yeah, overall, really impressive season from Bradley Beal. Most people wouldn't have him this high on their MVP ladder, like I said before, just because of their team hasn't done a whole lot this season, but he has really carried their team. And if you're talking about, most valuable player to their team, I don't know very many players in the league who are more valuable to their team than Bradley Beal is to the Washington Wizards. That team would be, by and large, the worst team in the NBA. I bet my life on that if Bradley Beal was not suiting up for them. So definitely in the bottom half, but they're towards the top of the bottom half of the league, which, there's 30 teams. They're probably, I think, about 20th place, 21st, 22nd, probably 22nd in the league, actually. That's probably a comfortable spot to put them. There's a big difference between 22nd and 30th. There is. And if you take Bradley Beal off this team, you're essentially putting them at 35th place. They would just be that bad. That's how bad they would be. So that's why he comes in at number 11 for me. So moving on to number 10 on my MVP ladder, I have Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler has had a really good season as the captain of this ragtag Miami Heat team. They've also, just like the Raptors and the Boston Celtics, have really surprised a lot of people in this Eastern Conference. Definitely a little bit better than people were expecting, especially towards the beginning of this season. The Heat have kind of fallen in the standings a little bit. The first half of their season was super impressive, and Jimmy Butler was a really big part of that. He's really been their primary ball handler the entire season, essentially playing point guard for them in a way. His playmaking has made a huge jump this season. This is definitely his best season of his career as far as playmaking goes. His rebounding is at an all-time high. His scoring is not his best scoring season, but it is on par with the best scoring seasons that he's had. Overall, really good season for Jimmy Butler. Hasn't missed too many games. I think only about 10, which when you're looking at 65 games is quite a bit and does affect, where I'm placing him on this list a little bit, but it's not too bad. Per 100 possessions, he got 28.9 points, 9.5 rebounds, 8.7 assists, 2.4 steals, 0.8 blocks, 58.3% true shooting. Rather efficient season with really good triple-double threat type numbers. All across the board, he's had a really good season. Defensive end, offensive end. Three-point shooting, he hasn't had a very nice season, obviously. The Heat do have a rather good three-point shooting squad around him, and so he's really played a different role this season, just being the facilitator and somebody who handles the ball, kicks it out, and drives to the rim and everything like that. So great season for Jimmy Butler. Coming in at number 9, I have Chris Paul. Chris Paul's case for MVP is very similar to Jimmy Butler's case. He's, kind of a veteran leader to a ragtag overachieving group of players. Per 100 possessions, he had 27.1 points, 7.5 rebounds, 10.4 assists, 2.4 steals. He shot 61% true shooting percentage, so very efficient, especially for a point guard. Very efficient season. He's played well on the defensive end, as he has his entire career. His turnover rate is as low as it's ever been. Really great season for Chris Paul and this Thunder squad. He has them in there at the 5th spot in the West right now. He's really been one of the most clutch players in the NBA this season. In crunch time, he's really been the Thunder's main option, and it's worked really well. All of his stats, his shooting percentage, everything is just skyrockets in the last 5 minutes of a game. And the same can be said for a lot of the players on that team, actually, like Dennis Schroeder and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Gallinari, everybody. But yeah, Chris Paul has definitely been the captain of that Thunder squad and really should be credited with where they're sitting right now. Dame time. So coming in at number 8, I have Damian Lillard. Dame has had a super impressive season, really inspiring, honestly. He's really carried that injury-riddled Portland squad to playoff contention in the West. You got to admire his heart and everything. He's kept their heads above water this entire season with his incredible scoring numbers and even his assists. His assist rate is at an all-time high. Per 100 possessions, he has 37.3 points, 5.6 rebounds, 10.1 assists, and get this, on 62% true shooting percentage. So super good. They obviously call him Logo Lillard for a reason. Shoots a lot of really deep threes, so that's super impressive to have that high of a true shooting percentage. And I actually saw this stat. His three-point percentage actually goes up a bit the farther he gets out, so he actually shoots a higher percentage from the logo than he does right behind the three-point line. He obviously takes a lot less of them, but he has shown that he does make a really good percentage of them, which is definitely more than can be said than for somebody like Trae Young, which is another really famous person that this season has taken a lot of logo threes. He's taken quite a few more than Lillard has this season, but I think he's actually made less. I might have to check that to make sure. But Trae Young is shooting high 20s, low 30s percentage, so something more like what you would expect from shooting out by the logo. But yeah, Lillard has really had that shot on lock this season with not much help out there because of all the injuries that Portland has been hit with this season. Rodney Hood went down with the Achilles tear. Zach Collins has been out the whole season. So has Yusuf Nurkic. So defensively, they've definitely hurt a lot. And Damian Lillard has really carried that whole offense this entire season.
So next I'm just going to give you the 5 to 7 range. I'm going to give you all 3 of those players at once, just because this group is really hard for me. They've seen a ton of movement just within the last couple days in terms of where I'm ranking them, just because all 3 of these guys are super hard to compare to each other. Also, all 3 of them have a very compelling case in my eyes for being at that 5th spot. So I am just going to share why I think each one of these players is deserving of the 5 spot, and then I'll also share some of the things that is holding me back on them and kind of allowing me to drop them back a little bit, and why I've kind of landed in this order that I felt comfortable enough to at least share in the podcast, that this is the order I want to do. Instead of just doing a flat out 3-way tie, which is part of me really actually does want to do that. But I think, actually nailing down a little bit of an order might be good. So at least for where my thinking is at in this current time right now, this is the order that I'm going to have them in. And so that is Nikola Jokic at 7, James Harden at 6, and Anthony Davis at 5. I genuinely think where we're going to see Jokic on most of these MVP ballots at the end of the year is definitely in this range. For sure, the 5 to 7, maybe 8. I could see people putting Lillard over Jokic, maybe, but I definitely would bet on Jokic being put over Lillard more so. And Chris Paul is a stretch, but it is also something that I see as a possibility. Once you get down to Jimmy Butler and those other guys, I don't think you'll see any reliable MVP ladder, and definitely the MVP ladder, the official one that we're going to see at the end of the year. There is no way that anybody besides Lillard or Paul are going to be put over Jokic, and both of those I doubt, especially Chris Paul. Lillard, I wouldn't be very surprised, but I'd also just kind of be like, I would have guessed Jokic would be put higher. But yeah, for sure, I can definitely see him going as high as 5, though. This range I think is very wishy-washy, like just from person to person, where their preferable criteria, their personal criteria is, where they rank these guys. So I also tend to be pretty modest, where I have, use my own bias. So I like to be almost over non-bias a lot of times. So like Jokic, I'm like, obviously I know he's super good, and he does have a really good case for number 5. But part of the reason why I'm so comfortable putting him back here at number 7 is just because I don't want to seem biased. Really, that is a huge reason. If I wasn't a Nuggets fan, I don't know if I would be putting him back here at 7 so comfortably, but I don't know. That's just kind of always been my tendency. I really don't like it when people are biased and put their own players so high. So honestly, obviously that's probably a bad thing too. Bad characteristic to have is to be so non-biased that you're actually biased the other way. So, but I don't think anybody's going to be too sad about ending up 7th on the MVP ladder in this season. So, because really loaded season, 7th is a really good spot for anybody to end up at. So I'm just going to read off his stats per 100. 30.9 points, 15.6 rebounds, 10.5 assists, 1.8 steals, 1 block, on a true shooting percentage of 60.4%. So yeah, I think Jokic has had a very similar season to last year, just in terms of, when you're throwing the whole season together. I think the beginning of the season he was playing much worse than last season, just because he started off the season really out of shape and not really in tune with, where we saw him last year. But the last half of the season, really ever since January, February range, he's been much improved since last season. I think he's been a better player in the regular season than he was last year, just in terms of the last month or two of the season. So I think he definitely was on an upward trajectory finishing out this year, and if, the year would have finished out as normal, maybe I would be more comfortable putting him at the 5 spot, but this is just where he is right now for how the season did turn out. I think the main thing that he has over last season is efficiency. He was a more efficient scorer this year. But other than that, numbers look really similar. And actually last year on the official MVP ladder, I believe he did end up in the 4th spot is where he officially ended up. And, I think he's had just as good of a season this year as he had last year. And he's ending up here at my 7th spot. So that's just a testament to how much competition he's had this season in the MVP ladder, really. I think so. Like I said before, I feel like there's a lot of players playing at a pretty high level this season that, without having a full 82-game season, I think it's a little harder to separate players, or for players to really separate themselves from the pack. I think you see definitely more of a spread the more games you get into in a season. But yeah, Jokic obviously has led Denver to the 3rd spot in the West. Most of the season was at that 2nd, sometimes even 1st seed in the West, kind of battling with the Lakers for that 1st spot in the West for a while, for a lot of the season. Jokic has also played every game this season. In my book, that's a huge thing, just because, if he plays every single game for the team, you can give more of a responsibility of the team's overall record when, the more games they play. So obviously that is a thing that is also a pro for him in the case of putting him at the 5 spot. Also the fact that he's definitely, I think, the best facilitator and passer on this list of 5 to 7. James Harden is really good at that too, but Jokic is obviously just more of a willing and I think a little bit more of a high IQ player in terms of offensive scheming and just where to put the ball, when to put it there, stuff like that. Really threads the needle on a lot of really nice bounce passes and through windows that very few people would ever be able to thread the needle through. So really, really good season for Nikola Jokic. 3rd spot in the West, 6th in the NBA for the Nuggets this season. So this is where he is ending up for now. Might change in like an hour, but this is where I'm putting him for now at 7. So at 6, I have James Harden. James Harden has led Houston to the 6th spot in the West, which is good for the 10th best record in the league, 40-24. He's only missed 3 games this season, so, really good turnout for him. Houston has climbed in the standings a bit ever since they really started playing microball, putting PJ Tucker there at center consistently, playing like Covington and Jeff Green and Thabo Sefolosha minutes down there as well. And so James Harden has obviously been the offensive engine that's been carrying the team most of the season, along with Russell Westbrook. really what unlocked them climbing in these standings. So really, I think what really unlocked the Harden and Russell Westbrook tandem to work successfully on this team is the micro ball scenario, just allowing Russ to be out there without giving up so much floor spacing by having, a Capella or a Chandler or somebody like that out there at the center spot. So that's been something that's been really awesome. Russell Westbrook has really kind of turned into a point center in a way. Like, he is another guy that I think they will be. He kind of playing center on defense sometimes, playing against big guys in the post. And also, the other team, I think, will be guarding him with their center a lot, as we've seen with the Jazz putting Gobert on Westbrook, which I think is a good game plan, just because with him not really showing a willingness to shoot threes, or even, if he's not making them, and he is taking them, just allowing him to take them out there. Having a center on him, just playing off him a ton, almost, having a foot in the paint when he's out by the three-point line, and just meeting him at the rim, I think is not bad game plan against him. But, obviously Russ is a workhorse, and he's going to get his stats. So that was a weird tangent. Obviously, I'm supposed to be talking about James Harden right now. So per 100 possessions, he had 43.5 points, so that's the highest we've seen so far in this MVP ladder. 9.3 assists, 8 rebounds, 2.2 steals, 1.1 blocks, on a true shooting percentage of 61.6%. So yeah, obviously Harden's big sell is he's a super efficient outside scorer, perimeter threat, can get to the rim, and what really drives up that true shooting percentage is all the free throws he takes. Free throws are a really good way. Getting to the line a lot is a really good way to bring up your true shooting percentage, and nobody gets to the line more than James Harden. So he's really made an art out of getting to the line and creating separation on step backs behind the three-point line. Obviously, very versatile scorer. Defensively, isn't awful. I think that people kind of don't give him enough credit on the end. As a perimeter defender, obviously not what you want, a little bit of a liability, but he can hold his own in the post. He's a pretty stocky individual, so he can hold his own against some posts down in there. I think that's where he's kind of utilized best defensively. I guess all I'm saying is you don't really have to hide him too much on defense, or it's not hard to hide him on defense. And I think, a little bit more effort on that end could go a long way for him as well. And we might see that, in these playoffs, effort dialed up a bit on that end of the floor. Obviously, argument for James Harden at 5 is stat-wise, he is the best scorer out of these three, and offensive talent really carries that team. Best ISO scorer for sure, probably in the NBA. But, he's really playing a very different game than these other guys. Harden really does kind of break a lot of these metrics. Kind of hard to compare him and his numbers to other players, just because, the way the Rockets play, every single offensive set basically is set around him. He has the ball in isolation, and all the decisions, everything is going through him. He's taking a lot more shots per game than basically anybody on this list. Yeah, he's really just kind of playing a different game, and that's also another reason why it's kind of hard to define how valuable he is to this Rockets team. Just because the Rockets would look so different if they didn't have Harden. They'd play a completely different way. They do have talent on that team. They do have some good pieces on that team around him. And when you're putting those pieces around Harden, they're really just turning into spot-up shooters that are effective on the defensive end of the floor. So it would be interesting to see how a Rockets team would play without Harden. Obviously, that's something you can say about a lot of teams because, a lot of teams are built around their star player. But I think it's just something you could say even more so about James Harden, just because of how ginormous the difference is between the Rocket-style play with him than it would be without him. Just a kind of hard player to gauge in that realm of thinking, of how valuable he really is to the team. But obviously, he is very valuable, but it's just hard to compare to some of these other guys that are also super valuable to their teams. So James Harden definitely does have an argument for 5. I'm feeling more comfortable putting him at 6 just right now, I guess. So at 5, I do have Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis, along with LeBron, obviously has led the Lakers to the first spot in the West, which is good for the second best record in the league, 49-14. If you look at stats per 100, Anthony Davis has obviously earned a case for this 5 spot. 37 points, 13 rebounds, 4.3 assists, 2.1 steals, 3.4 blocks. Obviously a front runner for the Defensive Player of the Year award. That, along with a few others, him and Giannis are really the main two. Ben Simmons and Rudy Gobert might be another couple that could be considered front runners for that award. Really, his work on the defensive end is the main thing that puts him over Jokic and Harden for me. Jokic isn't a bad defender either. Jokic is a really high IQ player. Some of the best hands in the league in terms of never really gambling for steals, but still having a really good steal rate and having a pretty good block rate as well for how boots to the ground type of a player he is. Doesn't really get much verticality, but his hand-eye coordination and just quick hands and everything like that is really what has elevated him to be actually a pretty effective defender. not really a rim protector in any sense of the word, but he is a really good team defender, and just in terms of his IQ and recognizing offensive schemes and things like that. But Anthony Davis, obviously a transcendent defensive talent. I think I did talk about him a bit in the first episode I made. I talk about his defensive versatility and just how he is such a Swiss Army knife on that end of the floor. Can guard 1 through 5 like super comfortably. Him and KG, I would say, are two of the main guys that you can say that about all time, that you're most comfortable with guarding any position on the floor. I forgot to mention his true shooting percentage is 61.4%. So yeah, obviously super efficient. But one thing about Anthony Davis on the offensive end is just that defensively he's been playing at such a high level this season. He's really dialed it in and focused on defense this year, which is really the first year in his career that he's been able to do that. And that's just because of the luxury of having LeBron on the offensive end of the floor, really captaining the offense and really being the facilitator and not having to really put the offense on his back like he has all those years with New Orleans. And just carry that offense to some victories. LeBron really does a great job facilitating and finding AD. AD can really just run to the rim and put his hands up most of the time and just fall into a few points per game. So I think that Anthony Davis has definitely coasted a lot on offense this season, just from watching Lakers games. It seems like he's really doesn't, he totally disappears for, I think, several minutes at a time where he's really not being active on offense at all. And that's just because, I think he is using a ton of his energy on the defensive end of the floor, which is obviously important. So I guess that's something that's really dicey to me. I don't really know how to gauge that and how to weigh that in terms of where he should end up on this list, because, he's compromising offensive effort to put more effort on the defensive floor, really is how it should be broken down. When you get into a really important playoff game, though, and maybe his team does really need some points on the offensive end of the floor, I'm guessing you probably will see him really go after it and become aggressive. It's just hard to say, but that is something that I've noticed and I just kind of thought was worth mentioning. But yeah, obviously the defensive end of the floor really redeems him for where he should end up on this list. And for somebody who's not even really trying on the offensive end of the floor most of the game, he's putting up such a good scoring rate, and obviously he's ending up this high on the MVP ladder, so that's really impressive. His rebounding rate is another thing I thought I would mention. It's like something that you might want to discredit him for, but at the same time, it's really explainable, really easy to rationalize and explain away the reason why his rebounding rate is so low. His rebounding rate is the lowest of his career. Definitely, this is the lowest season in terms of rebounding, for sure. And I think that mainly is just because he's been playing so much less of a center role in a lot of minutes of these games, really allowing JaVale McGee or Dwight Howard to really crash the boards on the defensive end. And, Anthony Davis, a lot of possessions, has just been leaking out and running in transition and getting easy points in transition. So that is where that comes from a lot. He's really just playing a different role, and that's why you're seeing a change in his rebounding numbers. But obviously, 13 rebounds per 100 possessions is not too shabby at all. Just in terms of the type of player Anthony Davis has been in the past, that is pretty low for him. So I just thought I would also dive into that a little bit, whether or not that changes some people's minds on where he should end up on this list or not. I just don't know. It's a hard thing to talk about because, you see the numbers lower and, automatically you think that should count against him. But there obviously is a really explainable way for why he's not getting many rebounds, and it's just because he's not crashing the boards. He's running in transition. So he's just playing a different role in the full court set. So yeah. So hopefully that was a good breakdown of the 5 to 7 range. Anthony Davis at 5, James Harden at 6, and Nikola Jokic at 7. Take that with a grain of salt, though, because like I said, this group is just really hard to rank in terms of, or this group is really just hard to compare to each other. But yeah, I think all of them are deserving and will end up in this range when you see the MVP ladder at the end of the season. This is the range that you're going to be seeing these 3 names for sure, the 5 to 7. James Harden I could see up at 3 or 4 maybe from some people, because James Harden is really I think just like his team being so high variation, he's a super high variation player in terms of where people rank him, just because the numbers are so gaudy. But some people, there's a lot of arguments for why his numbers are inflated and why his play style is different, and how he's just harder to really take those numbers seriously. So yeah, some people really, I think, underestimate him and some people overestimate him. Yeah, so I'm just more comfortable having him land here at the 6th spot for now. But yeah. Moving on to the next little range that I am not too comfortable with deciding on an order for, but I think less so. I think that this one is a little bit easier for me than the 5 through 7, but still, I have fumbled and jumbled around quite a bit the last couple days. And that is the 4 and 3 spot on this list, Who I have at number 4 right now is Luka Doncic, and I think that he will stay there for a while just because a couple days ago I actually did have him at 3rd, but I think I have made a 180 on that in terms of where I think he should rank just because of the other guy that he's in competition with for this spot. Something about it was really more of a pro for the other guy than a con for Luka that really changed my mind. But Luka has led the Dallas Mavericks to the 7th spot in the West, which is good for the 12th best record in the league, 40-27. Which I think with the Mavericks, their record really doesn't tell the full story. I think they are better than the record says for sure. Being in a pretty hard conference, a pretty hard division, playing a lot of better competition than a lot of these Eastern Conference teams are. I think if Dallas was in the East, they would be competing with like Raptors, Celtics, and Heat range in that 2 to 4 area for seeding. I think that they would be up there with those guys for sure. And I think that this Dallas is also a team that I will be touching on in another episode for Dark Horse contenders for sure. So looking forward to that. Really the main thing with Luka, which really brings him into this 3 and 4 spot rather than being up at 2 or something like that, is the 13 missed games. That is a bit more than most of the players on this list are missing, so that is something to take into account. But this other guy at 3 also has missed 13 games. But those two have the most missed games on this entire list. But obviously they've had such tremendous seasons in the games that they have played this year that they really did, I think, deserve the 3 and 4 spot on this list. Continuing to look at Luka Magic. He was 20 most of this season. He turned 21, I think February 27th or 28th or something like that. The only reason I know that is because it's either the same day or the day after one of my friends' birthdays. But per 100 possessions, Luka scored 41.7 points, 13.5 rebounds, 12.7 assists, 1.6 steals, 0.3 blocks on a true shooting percentage of 58.4%. So, amazing season for Luka. He definitely did, I think, shatter the record for the most triple-doubles for a player under 21. I think the previous record holder for that was LeBron. So, super historic player, a very unprecedented player for his age for sure, and a very unprecedented season. He did lead the Mavericks to the best offensive rating of all time, which was, is something that's pretty crazy. And I think they're a really good margin ahead of the second best one ever, which I think was actually the 73 win Warriors. So if you look at the list, I'm pretty sure every other team in the top 10 won the NBA Finals the season that they had that offensive rating. So that's something to think about. And that's really, one of the main reasons I do see them as a dark horse contender. Obviously, it's unlikely that they will win the NBA Finals this season just because they are a very unorthodox team. I think it is a type of team that we will see a lot more in the years to come just because of where the league is going. They're a mega floor spacing team. They're probably the best three-point shooting team in the league. And that's really what has made that offensive engine just run this whole season is obviously the tremendous playmaking and shot creation ability from Luka Doncic and the huge pick and pop threat from anywhere on the floor that Kristaps Porzingis is, and then the spot up catch and shoot 3-point ability from every other player on the roster was just amazing. Which when you think of Doncic and you think of Porzingis, one of the first skills that does come to your mind is their 3-point ability. But they actually have the 2 worst 3-point percentage out of all the rotation players on the Mavs. And a lot of that is due to the fact that all the other rotation players aren't shot creators for the most part. They are just getting a lot of open catch and shoot threes. So, the difficulty of the shot is a lot less so than what you're looking at with Porzingis and Doncic just because, defenses are really keying in on them and they are the guys with the ball a lot of times that are creating the shots off the dribble and stuff like that. So, obviously lower percentage shots, but a very valuable skill to have at the end of games where they just have the ability to create separation and get a shot off, at the end of possessions without needing to go through an offensive action that defenses might be able to recognize or see. That's just really hard for a one-on-one defender to guard when a player is just capable of creating so much separation like Luka does with his step back. That has been really huge for them this season. I think really what puts Luka here at the 4 spot instead of 3 for me is defensively. The guy I have at 3 is just far superior than him on that end of the floor, which Doncic is not a bad defender. He's a little bit of a poor defender in some aspects for sure, but overall I think he has the groundwork to become a actually pretty effective or at least serviceable defender in this league. Really what you're looking at with him, he lacks the speed and verticality and athleticism really for the most part to stay in front of players a lot of times, perimeter players. And, he is guarding, threes, 2s and 3s a lot in games just because of, the lineups they roll out there. A lot of times they have, on the offensive end, him as one of the only 2 guards out there. So defensively, he's one of the better options to put on perimeter players. So obviously I think that he would be a little bit better playing more inside. Most players, just for where the league is going, most players are going to be playing a lot more perimeter-centric defensively, just because with so much floor spacing, you're going to have really 4 shooters out on the floor with 1 non-shooter is what the mold of most teams are going to be going with within the next decade or so. So perimeter defense is going to become a huge skill, and already kind of has in the league. But, Doncic has super high IQ, so he is a really good team defender. He really just understands what's going on out there. A lot of times he has a pretty good awareness of things, so he can get his hands in passing lanes and recognize, offensive schemes and things like that. But, it really is that lack of traditional athleticism that you would want to see from a guy who's a perimeter defender in this league is really what brings him down on that end of the floor. Also the fact that he's just so young and not super experienced with NBA defense yet in his career, but I think it is something that he'll definitely grow in and really work on and really eliminate it as a weakness in his game for the most part. But yeah, so I'm just really excited for Luka Doncic's career going forward. So at the 3 spot, I do have Kawhi Leonard. Most of you probably guessed by now. Yeah, Kawhi is, I think a little bit lower on the terms of offensive phenomenon that Luka Doncic was this season. But, obviously Kawhi was still one of the best first options on a team in the league this season. But, for obvious reasons, just because he is one of the, like I think I touched on in the last episode talking about the Clippers, he is one of the best ISO scorers in the NBA. His mid-range turnaround, mid-range post-up game is just so reliable. And, I think I also compared it to 96 through 98 Jordan in that last episode that I talked about. I think he is the most like that type of scorer in the NBA today for sure. Another guy you can probably think of is like DeMar DeRozan, people like that. But Kawhi Leonard is obviously a transcendent superstar who has that really as his offensive mold. He can spot up from three-point range as well a little bit, pretty well. But I think in the tandem of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, I think the best fit is him with the ball and isolation, because I think Kawhi's a better ISO player than Paul George is, and Paul George is a better spot-up three-point shooter than Kawhi is. So I think that is the combination that I think they will go with a lot. But, obviously mixing it up a little bit sometimes works too. They can both do both roles just fine. But yeah, obviously Kawhi might be the best perimeter defender in the NBA, best one-on-one defender, all those things. With him adding so much more offensive load to his plate the last several seasons, we have seen him kind of drop a bit in defensive metrics and stuff, just because a lot of times, especially in regular season games, you're not putting Kawhi on the best player on the other team so much anymore, just to conserve his energy a lot. But, he obviously is a huge tool and huge weapon to use to have at your disposal in a playoff series. And especially having the offensive players that Paul George and Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell are on the Clippers, you're losing too much sleep over putting Kawhi on the best player on the other team and having him suffer a little bit of a drop off on the offensive end of the floor. But so yeah, that's just a really good built team. They're second in the West, fourth in the NBA, 44-20. Obviously Kawhi is load managed quite a bit. He missed 13 games this season, so that is like the main reason for sure that he isn't in the second spot, him and Luka both. But they are super close here at 4 and 3 together, as well as to the second spot. I think there is a clear separation between 2 and then 3 and 4 because of the amount of games that the guy in the second spot has played this season, for sure. Kawhi, super good season for him. At first, I think it was so easy for me to put him at the 4 spot a couple days ago, just because with him, I kind of automatically almost write him off for the MVP the past season or two, just because of, you're expecting him now to just only play 60 games a season, be load managed so much that you can easily just kind of write him off and disqualify him for this award. It really just makes thinking about this award a lot easier when you don't have a guy like Kawhi in contention for it. But, with the shortened season and him really not missing that many games compared to what we were expecting, I think that, he definitely does deserve this 3rd spot, and I just kind of automatically wrote him off a little bit before. So, yeah, obviously defense is really the main thing that puts him over Doncic for me, because he's performing at at least comparable level in terms of offense compared to Doncic, and defensively he's just a whole another animal. So that's really what puts him over the top for me. Also, the Clippers' record and team success. Obviously Dallas has had a better offense this season, but with Luka and Porzingis missing a lot of games this season, their record has suffered quite a bit. Just between the two of them, I think Porzingis has missed 17 games, and most of those games are games that Luka didn't miss, so they are without one of them a lot. Their team really suffers for that. And also just having the competition that they do in the Western Conference, and not having a fantastic defense either is really what brings them down in the standings. But Kawhi and Luka there at 3 and 4 is what I've ended up with my picks for sure. I don't think I ever mentioned Kawhi Leonard's stats per 100, so I'm just going to go through that right now really quick. 39.3 points, 10.7 rebounds, 7.3 assists, 2.6 steals, zero point 0.9 blocks on 58.5% true shooting. So yeah, offensive numbers pretty comparable to Luka's. The steal rate is really good, 2.6, one of the better ones in the NBA. His playmaking is something that has taken a huge jump this season. Like I talked about a little bit before with Pascal Siakam, how he's kind of added a new trick to his bag, added something else to his repertoire every offseason so far. Kawhi is really kind of the mold for that we've seen the last several years, where he comes back from the offseason with a very specific thing that he just exploded in or added to his game that he's just way better at this season. And earlier in his career, that was ISO scoring, where just it seemed like just over the offseason he just became a good ISO scorer when offensively he was really not that great of a player before, kind of lacking on that end, and was really just more of a defensive prospect, but really just working on his shooting and his ISO ability. He just became a superstar in that aspect just throughout off seasons. And so after this off season, it was really playmaking for him. That's really what exploded. His playmaking is by far the best he's ever had it. He was somebody that last season, when you're talking about the best player in the league and you were comparing him to Durant and LeBron and Giannis and even kind of Anthony Davis and Harden a little bit, were obviously a lot of people in that conversation. When you're talking about Kawhi compared to those guys last season, the thing that everybody brought up all the time was Kawhi's not as good a passer as any of those guys. He's just not the playmaker those guys are. He can't pass out of double teams the way those guys can. Double teams hurt Kawhi so much more than it hurts these other superstars, and things like that. But this season, you've just seen him destroy double teams. He's been, just compared to what he used to do just last season, when double teams are a much scarier thing to throw at him in terms of the team using the double teams. It's just you don't know if that is what you want to go with a lot of times, just because he's become such a better passer this season, especially in the paint, like him getting deep inside and two guys kind of coming right at him and him kind of wrapping around or dumping it off to a big Zubats or Harrell that's in the lane with him, or kicking it out. That's something that he's really grown in his vision for. It seems like he sees things now that he didn't see before, and so that's been a huge addition to his game as well, and really another thing that has kind of propelled him to this 3 spot in my MVP ladder. So coming in at number 2, I do have LeBron James. Most of you probably knew that already. I think I did touch on it in another episode where I talked a little bit about LeBron versus Giannis. I will obviously get more in depth in it right now. LeBron per 100 scored 35.1 points, 10.7 rebounds, 14.5 assists on a true shooting percentage of 58.2%. Yeah, solid efficiency, really good scoring numbers, good rebounding numbers, obviously tremendous assist numbers, leading the league in assists. Some might argue you could take off at least a couple assists per game just because of him having a target like Anthony Davis on his team. But, I think we should just be giving LeBron credit where credit is due by leading the league in assists this season, really facilitating that entire Lakers offense to that first spot in the West, second best record in the league, 49-14. Has only missed 3 games this season, so, he's been a huge contributor to their team, really main reason, him and Anthony Davis. Obviously, I think LeBron a little bit more so, that's why I have him higher on this list. Main reason why the Lakers are sitting at the spot they are in the standings, so really good season for LeBron. I think the big thing with LeBron, people arguing him for being the number 1 spot this season in the MVP ladder, is the fact that he's 35. A lot of people are using that as a reason, that he is 35 years old, and that he's doing all these things at 35, and how he's had an unprecedented season for, as far as 35-year-olds, which Karl Malone and MJ have both had really good seasons for being 35. I'm not saying their 35-year-old seasons was better than this one necessarily. We have seen people play at an MVP level at the age of 35. Obviously, Michael Jordan won the MVP at 35 in 1998. But I would argue that age was not a factor in Jordan winning the MVP that season. And I just think that age should not be a factor in the MVP discussion at all. It should be something that you mention in retrospect. Like, Luka Doncic didn't end up where he did on my list because of the fact that he was 20 and 21 this season. Like, that's just something you mentioned, like, oh, that's super impressive after the fact that he put together this season at that age. It obviously kind of ruins the award when you have a generational type talent like Giannis in his prime. And it's like, looking back on his career, if you give this award to LeBron, and it's kind of like, and he kind of passes his peak where he should be winning more MVPs. Why didn't Giannis end up with more MVPs? I thought he was really the best player in the league for that stretch. And they're like, oh, well, LeBron was still doing really good for the age of 35, so, they gave him another one. I just feel like, looking back, that's just going to be something that most people will regret and really kind of put a damper on the MVP award. If you want to give an award to a guy for being the best player in the league over 33 or 30 or whatever you want it, make an award for that. Give LeBron an award for that. Jordan was not just the best player in the league over 30 in 1998. He was the best player in the league. That's why he won MVP. That's why he led the league in scoring. That's why he won Finals MVP. So I just feel like, obviously, LeBron has had an MVP level season. If you drag and drop this season that he's had into multiple other seasons just in this decade, like 2011 or, some other years, I feel like he would win it. He's had an MVP level season. But the only difference is Giannis has had one of the best seasons of all time this year. And, if he didn't end up the same year, it's, he would run away with it. If you're taking Giannis out of this equation, LeBron, I would be comfortable saying is the MVP. And he's had an MVP level season. More so than any of these other guys other than Giannis. Like, calling what he did this year an MVP level season, I don't disagree with at all. He's deserving of an MVP award just in a vacuum, in like a general year. Like, he's like at the level that you could give a MVP award to. But Giannis has had one of the best seasons of all time, according to advanced metrics. And so we're just going to go through Giannis's numbers here really quick, who is obviously who I have at number 1. So Giannis, per 100 possessions this season, scored 43.8 points. So that's the highest we've seen. That's higher than Harden, and he's not even playing the same game as James Harden, so that's ridiculous. 20.3 rebounds, which is also the highest we've seen in the MVP ladder. 8.5 assists, which, isn't the highest we've seen, obviously, but is still a very good playmaking rate. 8.5 assists, most people would be happy with that. That's good. 1.5 steals, 1.5 blocks. So pretty solid steal and block rates as well. Really good defensive player this season, on a true shooting percentage of 61%. So really efficient, lots of points, lots of rebounds, a good number of assists, most people's front runner for the Defensive Player of the Year award. The Bucks are the best defense in the league because of Giannis, because of the scheme that they have built around Giannis on the defensive end. He has the Bucks sitting with the first best record in the East, which is the best record in the NBA, 53-12. At one point, they were on track to win over 70 games, be one of the best teams of all time in terms of regular season record. So, obviously, super good season for Giannis. Some people might not like me pointing to PER, and for those of you who don't know, PER is player efficiency rating, which is really, all these stats I've been giving you, points, rebounds, assists, efficiency, like all that kind of stuff, all the positive and negative contributions that a player has to an individual game that's measurable, all kind of added up and rolled up into one metric called PER, one number that really just tells you how good a player was in a season or how good a player is playing. It's not a perfect stat because it is really hard to compare just player to player with PER. It obviously doesn't tell like the full story of things. But what we have seen over and over again is when we're looking at the best seasons of all time in terms of PER, all the ones at the top, they're all the best seasons that you can think of just offhand as like the best seasons of all time. Like Wilt Chamberlain's 50-point, per game average season in 1963. 88 Jordan, 91 Jordan, 13 LeBron, 09 LeBron, 16 Steph Curry. All those seasons, they're ending up there right at the top. Like all the seasons that you just think of, like, off the top of your head as best seasons we've ever seen. They all end up there. So there is some truth to having a season on par with those ones. Should be something that, you should probably take notice of. And that's something that Giannis Antetokounmpo did this season. He ended up in the top 10 best PER seasons of all time. He ended up number 7, which is right behind Michael Jordan's 91 season and Wilt Chamberlain's 1964 season, and right ahead of LeBron James' 2013 season, which is looked at by most people as LeBron's best season of his career, and also 2 spots ahead of the only unanimous MVP season we've ever had in 2016 Steph Curry. So obviously something to take note of. It's not something to just ignore. Obviously, PR isn't perfect, but if you see a season end up with those ones, those are the, there's no other fluky seasons up there. Those are all MVP seasons that we all look at as some of the best seasons ever. All these players, all these seasons, won MVP. Why shouldn't Giannis? Beyond this number, what this number doesn't even tell us that other things do, Giannis led his team to the best record in the league. He led his team to the best defense in the league. PER isn't even a defensive stat. He's front runner for Defensive Player of the Year. What more does he have to do? He's done so much to deserve this MVP award, and you're not going to give it to him just because LeBron is 35 and he's having such a good season at the age of 35? I don't understand that. And just for comparison, I know that, like I said before, PER isn't, the best thing to use just comparing player to player and just using that as, end-all be-all or anything like that. But, just to compare this a little bit, I'll show you where LeBron's 2019-2020 season ends up all-time in terms of PER. So all-time, which it's still good. LeBron's this season has like I said before, an MVP level season. All time, his 2019-2020 season ends up as the 157th best season of all time, which is really good. But you're looking at that versus the 7th best season of all time in terms of PER, which is a offensive heavy metric, judging a player that is like leaps and bounds ahead of LeBron on the defensive end, obviously this season. Nobody would argue that. And this offensive heavy stat is putting him so much higher all time than even LeBron. And I think the main argument that you can really give against somebody who's saying, LeBron should be MVP this season, besides the age thing, is just this. Just take the names above these per 100 stats, or even just the per game stats, which is even more, or even less so in Giannis's favor, but still surpasses LeBron just, looking at the stats, even just looking at per game. But, to be more fair, looking at these per 100 stats, just switch around the names. Put LeBron's name over this stat line of 43.8 points, 20.3 rebounds, 8.5 assists, 1.5 steals, 1.5 blocks, on a true shooting percentage of 61%, leading his team to the best record in the NBA, and being a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, like frontrunner, and having the 7th best PER season in the history of basketball. Who would argue with that? Like, only the biggest LeBron haters ever would still kind of be like, I don't know. But almost everybody would agree. Yeah, LeBron just won his 5th MVP. LeBron is the MVP of the league at the age of 35. Like, no doubt. That wouldn't be a discussion. It really wouldn't. The only reason we are having a discussion right now is because the names are the way they are. Giannis's name is over this stat line, and LeBron's name is over the other one. I'd like to see somebody try to change my mind on that, but I just don't believe we would be having the same discussion at all if the names were flipped around. I just have a really hard time believing that. I think there is just definitely a bit of a LeBron age bias, as well as a big market West Coast team bias going on here in terms of who people are talking about for the MVP award. And honestly, I do bet on Giannis winning it this year, even though I am scared of a lot of these people who have votes that I hear talking like this sometimes about LeBron. I do still believe Giannis will win it, just because that's how good of a season he did have. But I think that this should definitely be a unanimous MVP selection, which I don't know if I've mentioned before on this podcast, but, obviously Steph in 2016 was the only unanimous MVP ever, and I do believe that season should have been unanimous. But I think there are multiple other seasons that we've had in the NBA's history that should have been unanimous when they weren't, because there's so many of these counterculture, people want to go rub the opposite way, want to zig when everybody else is zagging, in terms of people who get MVP votes. That I think really just needs to stop. People need to stop caring so much about narrative, so much about how old this guy is, so much about how emotional, this guy's season was, and things like that. And really, you gotta keep it consistent. Otherwise, you're just making this award so wishy-washy and so kind of invaluable in a way. You want the MVP award to mean something. You want the MVP to mean that this player had the best individual season and was really responsible for how good of a season his team had, and how good of a season his team had does weigh in heavily into how good of a player he was, everything like that. If you're leading the best team in the NBA, who was on track to win over 70 games earlier this season, for most of the season, and really until he missed a few games because of the birth of his child and a little bit of an injury, and he only missed a handful of games, and that was where they piled up so many losses. Really, they had very low margin of error chasing that over 70 game win season, obviously, and I think that should also be a testament of just how valuable he is to this team. I just feel like Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Greek Freak, is the MVP this season, and I don't see any other way about it. And that's not to discredit, not making it a discussion doesn't discredit LeBron James and the season he's had in any way. He's had a phenomenal season. If there was an award for the best player this season being over 30, LeBron wins it. Or even over the age of 27 for that matter. LeBron wins it, because I believe Giannis is 26. So Luka Doncic for best player in the league under the age of 25. He wins that. He was only 20 and 21 this season, so that doesn't affect where he ends up on this list. We're talking the best player in the league, regardless of age. That's what the MVP voting is. It's not, it's it's the most valuable player to your team. It should not have to do with age. It should not have to do with narrative, really, for the most part. Most narratives that people really do use in MVP voting are usually just kind of like, why does that matter? It's cool. It's a cool story, but why does that matter in terms of MVP voting? That's just kind of how I feel about it. Obviously, not everybody is going to feel the same way. There are a lot of people that do think LeBron should win it, especially people who don't have MVP votes. There are some of those people that are playing into that narrative and that thinking that do have MVP votes that I've heard. But, there's a lot of people just on Instagram, just, average NBA fans that are just like talking up a storm about how LeBron should be the MVP this season, and I just think it's kind of a ridiculous argument, and most of the cases they make I don't even agree with as cases. Like the stance that they take is just something that I'm like, why is that even a reason? But other things are important to other people. So, and obviously this is a bit of a subjective thing. We're using objective evidence to support a subjective case, and I just think Giannis is by and large the easiest one to make a case for at number one, and that's why I have him here. So that was a breakdown of Giannis versus LeBron. Hopefully that went over well. People enjoyed that, the whole MVP ladder thing. Now I'm going to move on to the All-NBA teams. So for All-NBA teams, I am doing 2 guards, 2 forwards, and a center for today, and which is obviously the official way that All-NBA ballots are done. And a lot of people do look at All-NBA teams and think that, the order of the guard spots or the order of the forward spots has to do with who's more of a point guard or who's more of a small forward is who is listed first in both of those. But it really doesn't have anything to do with that at all. It's just the first guard listed on an All-NBA team had more votes to be on an All-NBA team than the second guard did. So it's just whoever got more votes is listed first. So that is the order that I'm going to be doing them in, is who I think deserves the spot on the All-NBA team more than the next guy. So yeah, that is the order I will be doing these All-NBA teams in. I talked about, obviously 13 of these guys already in the MVP ladder, so I will only talk about and get into players when they come up of ones that I haven't talked about at all yet. I will just kind of read through these players that I've already mentioned. So my All-NBA first team guard, my first guard is Luka Doncic. My second guard is James Harden. My first forward is Giannis Antetokounmpo. My second forward is LeBron James. And my center is Nikola Jokic. So, obviously, so those are 5 of my top 7. So, pretty good spread in terms of, getting the best guys in the league on the All-NBA first team. Not bad, for sure. I think the rule is something like where the player is listed or can be categorized as, for a position is where most of their minutes, the majority of their minutes were spent at in the season. And for Anthony Davis, I do believe most of his minutes were at the power forward spot. So I do think he is actually ineligible to be considered a center officially on an All-NBA team. But I kind of wish that he could be. Obviously because he is closing games as a center, that's where you're going to see him in the ideal situations most of the time. And just, he's already had seasons in his career where he did spend most of his minutes at the center spot. And, looking forward, I think the rest of his career, I think he is going to be spending more minutes at the center spot than power forward. And also, just how loaded these other positions are compared to the center spot, I think it just, for my peace of mind, it makes the teams a lot better, a lot more fitting, like fitting the best 15 players on these 3 teams when you do put Anthony Davis as a center, so I would like to. So I might kind of read off the teams as if I was putting him at the center too, in a little bit as well. So, but for now, I am listing him as a forward, and that is why he is not on the first team as the center. Nikola Jokic is. And, even if he was listed as a center, I think Jokic does have definitely an argument for being the first team. But in terms of where I listed him on my MVP ladder, I think I would put AD on there for today on the All-NBA first team. Moving on to All-NBA second team. My first guard, so he's the 3rd best guard in the league this season on my, according to me. And he is also who I believe is the best point guard in the NBA this season, and that is Damian Lillard. And some people might argue with that and say, Luka Doncic or, James Harden have both played a lot of point guard this season. They're basically point guards and stuff like that. But it's hard for me to consider you an actual point guard when you never guard the opposing team's point guard. Like, Harden and Doncic barely ever do that. Defense is half the game. If you're not a point guard on the defensive end of the floor, how can I consider you just like a point guard in general? So Damian Lillard is somebody that is definitely a point guard on both ends of the floor, most of the time for sure, and somebody who you would definitely consider as a traditional point guard. And so as far as traditional point guards go, Damian Lillard was the best one in the NBA this season, especially with Steph being out, which I think he's kind of lived in Steph's shadow for the last several years for sure. And, Steph being the incredible transcendent player that he has been past several seasons, Damian Lillard has been kind of living in the shadow of that. But Damian Lillard is the best point guard in the league level type of player. Like, he is that good of a player for sure. And it's good to see him take advantage of the season with having Steph out and him getting, All-NBA second team spot for sure is awesome. And then, so at my second guard spot, so 4th best guard in the NBA, I have Chris Paul. Then at my first forward spot, so my 3rd forward in the league, I have Kawhi. Second forward spot, so 4th in the league, Anthony Davis. Obviously, you already talked about him a bit. Kind of want him to be at center in here, but just in terms of trying to follow the rules, I'm putting him here at forward. So then, this is where it really happens for me, where I really wish Anthony Davis was listed as center. So this person that I'm about to say doesn't have to be on the second team, which, obviously he's had a great season. He is a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. He's won Defensive Player of the Year past 2 years, and that is Rudy Gobert. Obviously, premier shot blocker, one of the best rim protectors, like almost ever, basically. The Stifle Tower. He's really not much on the offensive end of the floor other than a rim runner. I think that is something that he could grow in. He isn't too impressive, on the offensive end so far in his career. I think just compared to some of these other talents on these All-NBA teams, it does seem a little ill-fitting to have him on the second team. But, following the rules and everything for position, I have Rudy Gobert here at the center spot on the second team. And also, I have two other centers that I really was kind of back and forth with maybe putting on the second team over him. And I'll mention them next when I go to the third team. So on the All-NBA third team, my first guard on there, so my fifth guard in the league, is Jimmy Butler. My second guard on the All-NBA third team, so my sixth guard in the league, is Bradley Beal. My first forward on the All-NBA third team, so my fifth forward in the league, is Jason Tatum. And then my second forward, so my sixth in the league, is Pascal Siakam. And then at center spot, I'm really in between two players, and these two guys I was also considering maybe putting over Rudy Gobert. I could really go either way on this one. I think I am going to select Bam Adebayo right now to put as center on the All-NBA third team. And really the advantage he has over the other guy, which is Domantas Sabonis, is his defense ability. He really is kind of that mold, kind of like what I was talking about with Anthony Davis. I think him and Ben Simmons are really two of these other guys that are kind of that Anthony Davis mold of, Anthony Davis KG mold of being a super versatile Swiss Army knife defender in this modern NBA, can guard really 1 through 5. Ben Simmons a little bit less for the 5 part. Depends on who is the 5 that is his matchup. But, Bam Adebayo, elite shot blocker, fly up and down the court, has surprisingly good vision and facilitating playmaking ability. Good scorer. He lacks a jump shot, which, I think is something that he could definitely improve on to expand his game in the future to help stretch the floor on a team. But, phenomenal rim runner, really good shot blocker, Swiss Army knife defender. Has guard-like abilities, in the full court, for sure. He is one of those kind of unicorn-type players. I'm very interested to see where his career goes. I'm a pretty big fan of him. A lot of the things I just said about Bam is some things that I could also say about Sabonis. They are very similar players, especially on the offensive end of the floor. Similar size, can rim run. I think Adebayo is definitely a better rim runner than Sabonis is, but Sabonis might be a little bit better of a facilitator, maybe, and definitely a better shooter. Sabonis has a better jump shot, for sure. Where Sabonis falls short a bit, which he isn't bad on the defensive end of the floor at all. But Bam Adebayo is a Defensive Player of the Year candidate and a just super good, super impressive, one of the best players in the league on the defensive end of the floor. And Sabonis is just not quite to that level. The argument I would have for Sabonis over Bam is, like I said, he's a better shooter and he's played more games this season. Bam has missed more games than Sabonis, but today it really just wasn't too significant of an amount for me to really make the switch to put Sabonis over him. But if somebody just went in and switched this around for me and put Sabonis over Bam, I wouldn't be mad. I would be like, okay, yeah. Like, they both have really good arguments. Some other honorable mentions, I already kind of did an honorable mention with Domantas Sabonis a bit, but some other guys that I was, thinking about and looked at for these spots that I thought, really had a good case and really deserved an All-NBA spot. Really guys that I think have played at an All-NBA level this season, for sure. And then maybe some guys that I will touch on that you would expect to see up here, but who I didn't put up here for some reasons. Starting off, I'm just going to touch on Chris Middleton, which Chris Middleton I actually talked about last episode with the Bucks, having, a near 50-40-90 season. I believe he was only 0.01% off on field goal percentage for making it into the 50-40-90 club. Had a super good season, had the best record in the league, very deserving of an All-NBA spot, and would have been on here for sure if Anthony Davis was listed as a center. And it would, shift down these spots and have, Jason Tatum would be brought up to the second team, and then Chris Middleton would definitely be brought in here on the third team for sure, is what I would do. Phenomenal, deserving season from Chris Middleton, just with a lot of this competition that he has this season. Like I said before with the MVP, it's kind of the same thing that we have here with all NBA teams. I think there's a lot of players that have not really separated themselves from the pack as much as they could do in a full 82-game season. Also, I think the depth of the league in terms of talent it's just so much deeper than it has been in years past. Like, just thinking back to 10 years ago, there's just so much more talent in the league right now, I think, just in terms of rotation players. Like, there's so many less crappy players playing in rotations. There's so many things to love about guys that are in rotations right now. I just genuinely believe that. I don't know what other people's thoughts are on that, but I think that, if we were to have a expansion draft soon, I think now would be a really good time to have it, just with the depth of the league right now. is pretty concentrated, and spreading that over a couple more teams wouldn't be bad. Like, it wouldn't really dilute the league like it did as much in the late 90s with expansion teams. So moving on to some more honorable mentions, I also have Brandon Ingram. He's another forward that I think is deserving of a All-NBA team selection, or at least consideration for it. Really good season. One of the front runners for a most improved player this season, for sure. So I will touch on him in another episode. But yeah, really good season for Brandon Ingram on the New Orleans Pelicans. Ben Simmons is another one. Ben Simmons has missed a handful of games. That is part of the reason why I definitely have Butler and Beal over him. Since he has played most of his minutes at guard spot, that is where we're going to have to slide him in. And I just don't feel comfortable putting him in on the All-NBA team over Butler or Beal. I wouldn't be mad if somebody did put him over Beal just because they're really prioritizing team record and stuff. I wouldn't be surprised, I guess is what I'm saying, but I wouldn't slide Simmons in there over Beal, just personally. Simmons is another guy, like I just talked about with Bam Adebayo, Swiss Army knife defender, one of the Defensive Player of the Year candidates this season, for sure. Led the league in steals, I think, too. So, yeah, good season from Ben Simmons, definitely All-NBA level, for sure. Westbrook is another one. Things holding me back with putting Westbrook in one of these guard spots over Beal or Butler has really been his efficiency, true shooting percentage of 54%, which isn't terrible, but it is definitely not what you want with somebody like Russell Westbrook, who's taking so many of his shots right at the rim. Those should be much higher percentage shots for sure. Also, Westbrook started off the season pretty slow, not super great season for him. Really picked it up towards the last month or so, and if the season did finish out, Westbrook might end up a little higher on this, might have even taken over that spot from Jimmy Butler, because I think Jimmy Butler was on a bit of a downward trajectory towards the end of the season. His first half is what did it for Butler. So, that would have been interesting to see. Maybe they would have made a swap. But Westbrook also had missed 12 games, which, is something to look at a little bit. It definitely affects how I think of him a little bit. But really good All-NBA level season from Russell Westbrook this season as well. I'll go through some other guards, too, just while we're up here. Donovan Mitchell, Devin Booker, Kemba Walker, Kyle Lowry, Trae Young, Drew Holiday, SGA, John Morant, all had super good seasons. I think some more than others. I think Donovan Mitchell and maybe Kemba or Lowry would be the three out of those guys that I just named that I would probably put the highest on here. Devin Booker had a really good season. I think defensively, Mitchell is just, like, if you're just comparing Booker and Mitchell, Booker, better shooter, better passer. Mitchell, I think, is a better defensive player for sure, better rebounder, and on a better team. Booker is somebody that hasn't really shown so far in his career that he can really impact winning a whole lot. Mitchell has led the Jazz, last season being their offensive engine, and this season, carrying a lot of the offensive load as well, carrying the Jazz to a super good spot in the West, fourth best record in the West. So Donovan Mitchell, I think, deserving of a nod. Kemba, I think, a bit too. Also Kyle Lowry, all really good seasons. Trae Young. What really kept Trae Young off this list for me was, advanced metrics paint him as the worst defender in the NBA this season. So that's kind of hard for me to put the worst defender in basketball on an All-NBA team. But, his offense does redeem him enough for me to give him a consideration. Just because if you were only looking at offensive stats, he's an MVP candidate. Like, that's how good of an offensive season he has had. But, also a lot of people might look at those and argue that they're empty stats or they're inflated or, they're case of good stats, bad team. He doesn't really impact winning. He played on an awful Hawks team this season who piled up loss after loss. He has a bit more to prove in that department. Drew Holiday, super good defender. He's just a phenomenal player. I really like Drew Holiday. He's somebody that I would love to have on my team for sure. Just that type of player. Just comparing him to the seasons that Butler and Beal had, I think they were just a bit more deserving of the All-NBA selection. SGA, really good young, nice, shifty point guard. Long, gets to the rim. I talked about him a bit in the first episode with the Paul George trade. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, SGA. He had a really good season for this Thunder team. Obviously just really what did it for me is just the competition he had against him was Beal and Butler. Just hard for me to put him over them, but, definitely played at an all-star level this season for sure. And John Morant. John Morant had a super good rookie season, just that I would also give him a shout out. Really good rookie point guard this season. Tremendous year for him. And he will also be somebody that I definitely touch on in the Rookie of the Year race. So look forward to that. And then at forward, I did already mention Middleton and Ingram, but some of the other guys I wanted to touch on was Bojan Bogdanovic. Had a super good season for the Jazz. Somebody who I don't think many people are really considering for All-NBA team, but I think should be definitely considered. He's another one of these guys. If Anthony Davis was listed at center, I'd put Middleton personally, but Bogdanovic is also somebody I wouldn't be too mad about putting in there. Jaylen Brown also had a really good season, really good defender, two-way wing this season. Kristaps Porzingis, he started off a bit slow in terms of, where we saw him at pre-injury on the Knicks. Towards the end of the season, he really did pick it up a lot, and maybe he would have made a push for an All-NBA spot if the season would have finished out. But, he did miss 16 games this season as well. He's really developed his game into being just a huge spot-up threat from, the logo, basically, really anywhere on the floor. had really good numbers this season. I believe his per 100 were like 30 points, 15 rebounds, and 4 assists, or something along those lines, with really good block rate as well, good rim protector. I think he's a bit of an underrated defender. Porzingis, super good season. If you're looking at just 2020, ever since January, he's played definitely at an All-NBA level for sure. And looking forward to seeing where his career goes with this Dallas Mavericks team in the future, and seeing what he can do in the playoffs this season as well. Another guy that some people might be wondering where he is, or why I'm not talking about him, is Paul George. Paul George missed like 23 games this season, so he does kind of get disqualified for me talking about All-NBA teams. Also, he kind of has coasted this regular season a lot too. He's kind of taken the philosophy that Kawhi did last year almost, and just brought it to a whole nother level. He's kind of just taking it easy in the regular season, I think, really not doing too much. In those first 2 games that we saw him of this season, as when he first came back off of injury from his rotator cuff surgeries, he had some really high scoring outings those first couple games. But he's kind of fallen off a bit, not really putting so much effort forth, I think, on the offensive end. His numbers are comparable a bit to seasons that he has had. Obviously, compared to last season where he finished 3rd in MVP voting, obviously a big drop off since last season, just because injury, and also kind of just coasting, not really taking regular season very seriously. Last year he was 3rd in MVP voting, 3rd in Defensive Player of the Year voting, led the league in steals. Really good season from last year, career year for sure. Obviously that was a big part of what got him involved in the largest trade haul ever for one player. Obviously just not enough this season to be considered for All-NBA for me personally. Some centers that I thought were worth mentioning to put on All-NBA teams as well. One of them is Nikola Vucevic. He really carried the Orlando Magic this season into playoff contention in the East, or a 7th seed in the East. So good year for Vucevic. And the other guy is somebody that some people might be screaming at me about right now, for he should be a center spot on the All-NBA team, is Joel Embiid. And Joel Embiid missed 21 games this season, which is just over 32% of the season. So it's hard for me to put a guy on an All-NBA team who missed a third of his team's games. Just comparing that to all these other guys who were there for so many games, and they really were much more responsible for where their teams ended up in the standings. They were more responsible for how their teams performed than guys who only played 66% of their team's games, or 68% of their team's games. So that's just hard to compare. So that kind of disqualified him for me in a way. Also, him just not playing a ton of minutes, just because, obviously durability has been an issue with him, his health and stuff in years past, and, his whole career really. So I think if he really gets on top of his strength and conditioning and gets in really good game shape and can, play a full season at a high level, for sure, I think he would be on this list. And I think at his best, he's probably the best center in the league, him and Jokic. He's as good or better than Jokic, I think, at his best, when he's all dialed in. I feel comfortable saying that. He's definitely a top 2 center in this league, but it is hard for him to be put on an All-NBA team this season just because of how many games he missed. If you're somebody who doesn't care about games played or whatever, and you want to put him on an All-NBA team, be my guest, go for it. You can do that. That's just not how I think of it, and how most All-NBA voters do look at it. People who are given that vote by the NBA. And like I mentioned earlier, my friend Anthony is a Sixers fan who might be super mad at me for this and might argue with me about it, but this is where I have Embiid, which is not on an All-NBA team this season. But yeah, I think that was it for guys I was going to include as honorable mentions. Some other things that I probably want to touch on, just because of this podcast has been taking several days, just because I've been busy, and also this podcast episode has had some trouble with me recording the first couple times, and just random stuff that I might get into another time. There's been a lot of things happening with, scrimmages and things happening in the NBA, and also hirings have been happening obviously too. For example, the Knicks just hired Tom Thibodeau the other day, signed him to a 5-year deal, which is obviously a big deal. Tibbs, well-renowned coach in this league, coached those Bulls teams with D Rose, made it to the conference finals. He's a really hard-nosed, old-school coach, so I don't know how well he's going to fit on a young Knicks team. Personally, I don't know if he was the direction I would go. But, obviously he is a really good coach that is deserving of a spot in this league, I believe. He's just very, old-fashioned compared to where the league is going. And I think the Knicks might want somebody that's a little bit more progressive in terms of coaching philosophy and X's and O's and stuff like that. But, I'm not the Knicks. Also, I know that signing a coach as big as him, you kind of got to give him the 5 years. But Knicks, I feel like, just need to stop signing coaches for so long. They're going through coaches so fast, and they're just still paying them all. They sign them to 5-year deals. They're only with them for a year, maybe 2. Fire them, go on to the next one, sign a 5-year deal. But, you live and you learn, except for the Knicks. They don't really learn. But yeah, on to the next thing. Something that I saw the other day was Kyle Kuzma in the Lakers scrimmage. he went off for a lot of points, which when I first heard about it, I didn't watch the game, but when I first heard about it, I was like, oh yeah, like I talked about in the other episode, how he's a heat checky ISO scorer. That might be funny to go look at and see that that's what he was doing. But to my surprise, a lot of the highlights I was watching, a lot of the points he made were from catch and shoot threes, which is something that I was talking about was something that he needs to improve on. So that's a really good sign for the Lakers. If Kyle Kuzma is coming off screens or just stretching the floor, catching and shooting from three consistently, like it did look like he was doing in that scrimmage, that's gonna be huge for them this postseason and making a run. That might be somebody that you want to have in there in the starting lineup and closing games alongside LeBron at the forward spot. So yeah, I think that is a huge development, honestly. So yeah, that was really cool to see as well. And then yeah, Andre Roberson coming back and playing his first game in, I believe, like 2 years, over 2 years. January of 2018, I think, was the last game that he's played. And him really being known as somebody who really lacks a three-point shot. Maybe he's been working on it over, his rehab, which has been 2 years, so, a lot of time to work on a three-point shot. I know it was just a scrimmage, not, doesn't really mean anything, but he closed out the game with 2 huge threes in the final possessions of the game. Both, obviously wide open, but still, like, huge for him developing that to his game. He's really more of a really nice long guard forward defender. He's a good versatile defender to have out there in a rotation. And adding that three-point dimension to his game will be huge for him and for this Thunder squad. He can really fill that forward role that they need so badly on this team. They don't really have very much depth at all at that forward spot. They have plenty of guards. They have a couple good centers, but they really don't have very many forwards to throw out there. So Andre Roberson might be huge for them in that regard. So yeah, thank you for listening to this episode. Hopefully this was a at least semi-enjoyable episode for people to listen to. I really was just kind of naming off players and talking about stats and stuff. So I'll be curious to see how entertaining this was for some of my friends. I don't know if they're really going to stay engaged and listen to these episodes after the first one. I think my first one might end up having the most views, which is kind of sad to think about. I kind of do want this to go somewhere, but we'll see as time goes on. If you're my friend and you're listening to this right now, just text me. Let me know what you think of it. Comment it too, actually. Commenting would be better, but unless it's negative, then text me. But yeah, I'd love to hear any feedback from, even if you're not my friend, leave a comment, message me, something. Just let me know what you think of it, what you like about episodes that you've heard so far, what you don't like, what you think I should talk about more, just different ideas for stuff for me to talk about or get into or try and stuff like that. I'd love to hear all of it. If you're watching on YouTube and you liked the video, then please consider leaving a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. If you're listening on Spotify, then consider following the feed to, listen to new episodes when they come out. But thank you guys for listening, and I'll talk to you guys next time.